this Paul Lambert?
It is.
Oh, hello. I'm writing an important paper, and I heard you were a member of this club called Skull and Bones.
I'm not. I don't have a comment on that. Our membership is private. The membership is private, and I really can't tell you whether I am or I'm not.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh. But maybe you can tell me, how do you get into Skull and Bones then?
I can't talk about it.
Or how did it all start?
I can't tell you.
Okay. Is there anything you can tell me?
No.
Okay.
I don't mean to be unfriendly, but that's our policy. It's policy of the organization, and so I really, I'm not at liberty to violate it.
Het geheime genootschap Skull and Bones werd in 1832 aan de befaamde Yale Universiteit opgericht. In een tempel op de campus, The Tomb, worden nog ieder jaar 15 nieuwe, zorgvuldig geselecteerde leden geïnitieerd.
Well, my interest in this whole question of Skull and Bones came about through a student of mine, a fellow named John Lawrence, a bright student, and he had some ideas, and so I pushed him further to do serious research. And he and I both came to the conclusion very soon that much of the information is not very substantial. Secret societies don't leave a lot of paper trails behind them, that's for sure.
Somebody sent me a package, and it was the membership list of Skull and Bones. I'd never heard of Skull and Bones before. And I let the package sit for maybe 2 years. This happened about, possibly in the late 70s, about 1980. The package arrived, I let it sit because it had no interest to me. And then one day I probably had nothing better to do, so I started thumbing through the list, and I thought, well, my goodness, this is the establishment. Name after name after name, you know, Bush, Bundy, Mallon, Harriman, all these names were coming out at me.
It's called the Skull and Bones Society, and members, such as this alumnus we found lurking near the tomb, don't like chatting about their society.
Nobody's going to talk with you. This is a private club.
A private club with a long and mysterious history dating back to 1832. It meets inside a building called the Tomb. Past members have ranged from President Taft to Secretary of War Stimson. And the more current membership list, obtained by American Journal, reads like who's who.
Is the Bones in secret?
It includes politicians such as Senators John Chafee of Rhode Island and John Kerry of Massachusetts. Then there's Victor Ashe, the mayor of Knoxville, Tennessee, and columnist Bill Buffett, along with top businessmen and federal judges.
So there's nothing to the secrecy except the secrecy.
Right. One of the things that happens in consequence of our unwillingness to discuss in detail what it's about. That anybody can make up a story and we won't even discuss it.
And that, you know, being in the research business, that kind of gets you interested. And I started to piece it together. And I'd heard rumors, you know, as everybody else has, about power structures and establishments within countries. And it was the meshing of these people who had sworn an oath to each other, were very powerful, and limited to possibly 20 or 30 families of the old Eastern European establishment. That intrigued me, and then bit by bit I began to put the story of the book together, and probably it took me probably 3 to 4 years.
These people that join organizations such as Bones or the Masons actually leave their family relations that they had when they were children and prolong that intimate family relationship with their brothers from the lodge. And they swear to take care of each other's interests, and they do it. And when that in the normal conduct of life is probably okay, but when one of them becomes president of the United States, it's time to ask questions. What have you sworn to do for your brothers? And what interests are you pushing that are really on their agenda, not on the agenda of the American people?
Are there any famous members or well-known members?
George Bush.
The George Bush.
Yeah. But that kind of focus is not a great interest to the members.
How do you mean?
Because we're much more interested in the personal issues than external achievement.
The best-known bonesman is ex-President George Bush, who, according to tradition, is supposed to avoid admitting he's a member, even when the question comes in the Oval Office.
Mr. President, are you a member of Skull and Bones?
Okay, you ever met Bush or?
Oh yes, he was a couple years behind me, but I have met him.
What we have here is a private network acting really in violation of the United States Constitution, infesting the White House, the National Security Council, the State Department, the Pentagon, the CIA, and other government institutions. And they've been carrying out a policy which was not the policy of the President or the Congress, not a policy that was approved by the voters.
They are still the representatives of a long tradition, a thousand years tradition, from the Knights Templar through the Illuminati, through the Masons, through the Puritan families, and all of those families that went to Yale, founded Yale, and have used Yale to become powerful. Are they done? No. There's all that tradition, and it has to be protected, and it has great wealth to protect. And how do they protect it? They'll find new means. They'll hold offices. They'll hold appointive offices and elective offices, and they will be in charge of huge amounts of money.
Do you know how it all started out so long ago?
I really don't know much about the history of the group. No, I don't. It's been established for, I think, about 150 years in New Haven by undergraduates and graduates of Yale University. 15 members are elected each year. Basically, personal relationships are the most important product of the years that you spend in relationship to the organization.
Wow.
It's a very personal experience.
The core of Skull and Bones is 15 or 20 families. These are old line families. They came to the United States from England about the 1600s, 1700s. And you've got the Lords and the Wadsworths and the Bushes.
Some examples are, again, the families that made their fortune in the opium trade. And you've got to remember the opium trade meant going from India, which was under British domination, to China, where the British were attempting to open up an opium market and indeed fought wars to do that. So these are the families whose family fortunes go back precisely to that kind of trade.
Then you've got a newer element which arose in the 1870s, the money element, like the Harrimans, which his father was E.H. Harriman, the railroad magnate. So the core, as you go through the early 20th century, is comprised of 15 or 20 families, partially from old line American families going back to the Pilgrims, and partially from money, banking money, that came up through the late 19th century.
And how do you get into this club?
The ones that were there before choose you.
And what goes on during initiation?
Nothing very extraordinary, but it's held very closely.
You cannot ask to join Skull and Bones. You can't apply. What happens, as I've pieced it together, is that you are watched. See, this is a senior society. So you're 2 years at Yale before you're invited to join, if you're going to be invited. There's only 15 members each year. And you're being watched, and you're being catalogued, and you're being assessed. You know, is he a good team player? Is he a good sportsman? This kind of thing. And then the previous year, members of the previous year decide who is going to be tapped, the 15 new members, and then a representative of that, the last year's cell goes out and they ask, do you want to be tapped, or do you want to be joined or not?
Al sinds de oprichting van Skull and Bones geldt Tap Day als een belangrijk evenement op Yale.
And the emissaries of the various secret societies would come up behind them, tap them on the shoulder, and say something like, "Skull and Bones, do you accept?" And generally, of course, they did accept. And then, as the people were tapped, they then left the courtyard and proceeded to the vault-like or mausoleum-like headquarters of these secret societies. That, I think, since has been abolished or moved indoors or somehow is no longer so easy to observe as it might have been, say, 50 or 100 years ago.
Initiation ceremony. They have the initiation ceremony. Somebody gets dumped naked in a bath of mud. Well, to me that seems juvenile. And what concerns me is these are the men in which the fortunes and the life of the world depend. This is the part that worries me. I mean, whether you want to go around and do that, it's your business. You know, you can stay in mud all day long, as far as I'm concerned, and baths of mud. But don't take this man and put him in control of world policy, which can bring about war and famine and heaven knows what else. This is what worries me.
Part of the problem is the source of information. We have very little about Bones from the tomb itself, and most comes indirectly, such as an article written by a student that went to Yale and actually lived in the Jonathan Edwards dorm, and he had this to say. It was part of the Jonathan Edwards folklore that on the April evening following tap night at Bones, if one could climb to the tower of Weir Hall, the odd castle that overlooks the Bones courtyard, one could hear strange cries and moans coming from the bowels of the tomb as the 15 newly tapped members were put through what sounded like a harrowing ordeal. Returning alone to my room late at night, I would always cross the street rather than walk the sidewalk that passed right in front of Bones. Even at that safe distance, something about it made my skin crawl.
Yes, well, you see, when they're initiated, I think part of the process is that they are leaving this life and being born into another life. The good and evil is part of this duality process. So what really they do is they take a world in which man essentially tries to be good, tries to have good objectives, because basically this is the only reason we've survived as humanity is because most of us have good objectives. They've taken that objective and they've reversed it. And they've made their end to be destruction and death. Not death for the 15 in the cell, death for everybody else. That's the meaning behind the symbolism. They seem to stand for the exact opposite, reversal, which is satanic.
Skull and Bones is a kind of Freemasonic association, and I guess you could call it a death cult. You can call it a satanic cult. The symbolism, of course, is the skull and crossbones, right? The death's head, or Totenkopf, I guess as the SS called it during the Second World War. It's a very sinister symbolism. It is obviously Freemasonic.
Everything about them reflects this symbolic hidden meaning. Everything they do reflects the hidden meaning. And I mean, I don't think that these people do these things accidentally or coincidentally. They're intelligent men. They know what they're doing. They know what they're joining. All I can ask is whether anybody who sees this, would you join an organization which has Skull and Bones as a symbol? And I think in most cases the answer will be no.
Here we have a network of Yale-trained financiers. They're advancing under this pirate flag. They're fresh from their satanic rites, their death cult, and all of the sinister claptrap that they have around this. They go into the United States government. They don't care about the president, the Congress, or the Constitution. They take over these institutions and imprint upon them their own policy, which has been tremendously damaging to the United States and the world.
I don't know of any member of Skull and Bones who's made any great contribution to literature, to art, to sociology, to anything we might do to help the world progress and be happier. That's a very interesting thought. They don't show up, say, in the Red Cross or in peaceful organizations, except where a peaceful organization is used for an ulterior motive. That probably is a very interesting observation that they exist apparently for war and destruction and greed and personal acquisition of finance. They don't exist to better the lot of the fellow men. They exist to better their own lot as a group.
As is often said, the devil is in the details. What happens after these people leave Yale and become powerful?
Een van de bekendere Bones-leden uit de geschiedenis is W. Averill Harriman. Hij bekleedde hoge politieke functies onder meerdere presidenten en was de man achter wat nog steeds de grootste privébank van Amerika is, Brown Brothers Harriman. Voor deze bank maakte hij begin jaren 20 in Berlijn contact met de Duitse grootindustrieel Fritz Thyssen.
Especially since you're a man that's probably spanned more historic events since the war than any other I know of. You're almost a decade older now than the century, and I wonder if you could tell us as a starter, Governor, how you maintain this youthful appearance of yours.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think all one can say is that if you work hard and interested in what you're doing, I think that's the important thing, and then I play hard too, exercise, and I enjoy life.
On looking at the membership structure, one can identify a core. Made up of a number, as I say, 15 or 20 families, and it appears that at one time the Harrimans were the center of this core.
Well, we know history does have evidence to show that Harriman gave, through Harriman, money was made available to Hitler in his early years, in the early 1930s. And one can ask, how does that relate? What would be the reason that Harriman would be interested in that?
The Union Banking Corporation was established formally in 1924 as a unit in the Manhattan offices of W.A. Harriman and Company, interlocking with the Thyssen-owned Bank voor Handel en Schipvaart in the Netherlands.
De Rotterdamse Bank voor Handel en Scheepvaart werd gebruikt om via grootindustrieel Fritz Thyssen Hitler en de nazi's van geld te voorzien.
Mr. Aldous.
Yes.
Yes, this is Anton Chaitkin calling from Washington.
Yes.
Yes, and they've told me your name and your.
We're looking at
your position over there.
the link between August Thyssen Bank in Germany and Union Bank and so Skull and Bones in the United States. Okay, the Union Banking Corporation was in New York, controlled by BHS. BHS was in Holland and Rotterdam, and these were Dutch and German Nazis. It was a Nazi outlet. And that was a subsidiary of the August Thyssen von Haidt Bank in Germany. That's the channel, the conduit for which we're looking.
Nou, de Bank voor Handel en Scheepvaart, die is mij wel bekend. Ik heb ook verschillende stukken ervan gelezen en gezien, maar hij staat beslist niet bekend als een bank waar ontzettend veel dingen zijn gebeurd die het daglicht niet konden verdragen.
Then how do we know that this was a transfer mechanism? Well, one is that we know that August Thyssen financed Hitler, or was part of the financing for Hitler. This comes from several sources. And he said he did it through BHS. We know that much. It's more difficult to make the link between BHS in Holland and the Union Banking in the United States.
Het is gewoon een vaststelling van de connecties liggen daar met die en dat is het dan. Maar verder Ja, schurkenstreken, om het zo maar eens te noemen, van die bank, die zijn voor zover ik weet, zijn ze niet bekend.
We do have the conduit, we can prove that. We have the intention, and the purpose seems to me to be quite similar between the two groups. And we know that Tyson at one end was financing Hitler and said he did it through BHS, which is halfway down the conduit line. Whereas there's that gap between BHS and New York that we can't fill in with transfer slips.
Yeah, I was reading in Anthony Sutton's books where he discussed the question of the Union Banking Corporation as a Nazi front, and I took that lead to make an inquiry into the United States Justice Department as to what happened to the bank. And turns out from old timers in the American Justice Department who were willing to talk that the U.S. government had acted against the Thyssen-Bush-Harriman Bank and many other enterprises under a certain kind of order called the vesting order, very little known today. And I went into the basement of the Library of Congress and pulled out these musty old records showing that the United States government had seized and shut down this Thyssen-Harriman Nazi banking complex.
Nou, die vestingorders die in Amerika zijn afgegeven, dus laat december 41, begin 1942, en aan vesting wilde zeggen dat de bedrijven onder beheer worden gesteld. Dat gaat eigenlijk in praktisch al die gevallen om Amerikaanse bedrijven met een grote Duitse invloed, of een vermoede Duitse invloed, en met name dat vermoede invloed is belangrijk, want dat wil men op alle mogelijke manieren tegengaan, hè, die Duitse invloeden daarin. Dus neemt men liever 100 bedrijven te veel onder beheer dan eentje te weinig. En de achtergrond is eigenlijk een vorm van nationale veiligheid, zou je kunnen zeggen. Want via die bedrijven, dus Amerikaanse bedrijven met Duitse invloed, werd er heel vaak spionage gepleegd. Via deze bedrijven kon men inzicht krijgen in de Amerikaanse oorlogsproductie, wat natuurlijk voor de Duitsers van levensbelang was. En ja, dat is eigenlijk de achtergrond voor al deze vestingorders die er zijn afgegeven.
Yeah, but this avoids the problem that there are two classes of Nazi collaborators. One would be somebody who's a German who thinks he's acting on the side of Germany in a war, some ordinary German. Then you have big financiers, big money people, people in politics and in diplomacy, people in the DuPont and Rockefeller and Harriman companies and their collaborators in the richest companies in Germany at the highest levels of German society. When the United States government took out vesting orders against the richest people in Germany and New York, that's different from the incidental picking up of some Germans who may have been in the German-American Bund. These are very important. That's why the vesting orders against Thyssen, DuPont, and Rockefeller are the most important ones done by the American authorities during the war. 42, yeah.
But still the point is that I can't believe why English and American capitalists should support Hitler in 1922. That's what you started with, wasn't it? But okay, let's exchange books.
Terrific.
That'd be a good idea.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll talk to you again.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. So, I mean, he has nothing to say opposed to what we're doing. Because he doesn't know about American industry, doesn't know about American finance, he doesn't know about these people who did these things. And the issue for the American government was Harriman and his relationship to Thyssen, or at least the Harriman Bank and its relationship to Thyssen. He knows nothing about that.
But don't you think he should know?
Yes, he should. It is amazing that he doesn't.
Uit originele documenten van het in Amsterdam gevestigde Internationaal Instituut voor Sociale Geschiedenis blijkt wel degelijk de onderlinge samenhang tussen de Bank voor Handel en Scheepvaart, de August Thyssen Bank van Frits Thyssen en Harriman's Union Banking Corporation.
The investigators concluded that the Union Banking Corporation has, since its inception, handled funds chiefly supplied to it through the Dutch bank by the Thyssen interests for American investment. So here is Averell Harriman and Prescott Bush, the leaders of the bank in Manhattan, working with Fritz Thyssen. They, in the Skull and Bones network in the United States around Harriman, are pro-fascists, and they're working with Thyssen and others, establishing a money link to support the backers and sponsors of Adolf Hitler from at least 1924, probably 1923 onwards.
I didn't know about this. There's your link, right there. There's your link. Established in 1924 in the Manhattan office of W.A. Harriman. So it is the same thing I said. Oh, yes. That was the time that Hitler was looking for money. Sir Emil Kurdoff, I didn't know he was looking so. That's it. That's the clinching link. I think it's a reasonable supposition that money followed from that, even if I don't have the translation.
Here on the Black Sea, near the city of Yalta in the Crimea, is the meeting place of the leaders of Britain, Russia, and the United States, scene of the most successful international conference of the war. Anthony Eden, British Foreign Minister, and Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain. Marshal Joseph Stalin, Premier of the Soviet Union. Edward Stettinius, with Averell Harriman, United States Ambassador to Russia.
Averell Harriman's father was put into business running railroads with money from the royal family of England. He was their nominee. And then Averell Harriman's mother paid for the start of the American branch of the British eugenics movement. He established this, what we call today, fascist movement in America, the Eugenics Record Office, originally set up around 1909 by Averell Harriman's mother.
I know. There's a New York Times article on the Eugenics Society, founded by Mrs. Averell Harriman. She financed it. And its policy was to, how can I put it, to not rid the world, that's too strong, is to discourage undesirables. And then who are the undesirables? Well, it's pretty much, it comes out, as I remember reading the article, that there were certain unfortunate people, and not as well off as others, which I suppose would include blacks and Jews, and it's a racial thing. The Eugenics Society was racial.
Where the Harrimans created this American branch of that movement, then it was moved as a headquarters to Yale University, where the American Eugenics Society had its headquarters.
And so you've got this racial policy financed by Mrs. Harriman, the mother of the two bonesmen. Her husband was a bonesman, her two sons were bonesmen. So she gets kind of caught up in this thing.
The aristocrats from England, the aristocrats from the southern United States combined to place at Yale University this kind of ultra-aristocratic club dedicated to eliminating equality in the world, dedicated to subverting our government and its original mission of man's equality instead of their point of view, which is the racist domination of Anglo-Saxons over all other groups in the world.
De film Erbkrank, een van de propaganda-instrumenten van de nazi's.
Ernst Rudin, who wrote Hitler's race laws in 1933 was in the American Museum of Natural History at the Harriman Run Conference in 1932 of the eugenics movement for the world. He was elected leader of the world movement there at that Harriman meeting and went immediately back to Germany. Hitler was put into power within a few months, and Rudin was put in charge of writing these race laws that said if Jews mix with Aryans, they're going to be punished.
This idea of a racial policy is, I think, just as important as the financial link. I mean, sure, you can hand over $1 million marks, but if a policy is important as a racial policy, one of extermination it came down to, also continued, then you're right back to the same group. And one can go further, right up to today, and ask questions about these racial policies. For example, I read Robert McNamara. McNamara used to be Secretary of Defense in the United States. He's not a Bonesman, but he's one of the so-called whiz kids. If you read McNamara's latest book, you will find that he says that population expansion is more dangerous than atomic warfare.
They still have the same point of view about cutting the budget and getting rid of whole classes of people that are superfluous in their view, the elderly or people of the wrong race. And this is their point of view today.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Als we willen weten wat het gedachtegoed van Skull and Bones tegenwoordig is, moeten we kijken naar de persoon van George Bush. Na William Taft, het tweede lid van Skull and Bones dat Amerikaans president wordt. Hij wordt hier ingezworen door Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, ook Skull and Bones lid.
With Bush, we reached the bottom of the barrel in terms of American politicians. You have to look at him again and again and say, how did this guy make it compared to any number of other political figures that would have been perfectly plausible presidential candidates? You've got to point to the family money, again to this Brown Brothers Harriman network, which meant media, which meant friendships with senators. Ultimately, it meant the support of Kissinger. That brought the support of Nixon. At every critical turn in Bush's career, he was often defeated. He was, again, defeated in his Senate attempts in '64, in 1970, but he was always then getting appointments from people like Kissinger and Nixon so that he could somehow keep going and try to make this bid for the top, for the vice presidency, and then after that somehow slither into the presidency based on the fact that many people in 1988, many people, especially in the southern states, were really voting for Reagan because they thought this was going to be a continuity of the Reagan years, which they had found perhaps tolerable.
There's a certain stability to our system, and I think experience taught me project that stability. Don't go for the grandstands. Don't over-dramatize things. The American people are entitled to know that the system works, that experienced people know how to handle moments of crisis.
You've got an example of Bush. The Bush family, of course, has been a long time in Skull and Bones. Bush is 1 year ambassador to China, 1 year in Central Intelligence Agency, then he becomes vice president, then president. Now, he covers so much ground, so quickly, that, and he's not an abnormal genius or anything, but there had to be pressure and a power play behind the scenes. When you look at incidents like this, and there are many of them, you cannot arrive at any other conclusion that behind the scenes there's some pushing and pulling and almost manipulation to advance. And advance is the word used by many, many members within Skull and Bones. They advance their interests.
We can certainly say that George Bush, in his political career, which reaches back into the 1950s, is a suitable metaphor to express the power of these Skull and Bones Harriman networks in modern American life. And it's also the case that George Bush brings together as a kind of a nodal point all of the different components that are involved in the Skull and Bones and also in other allied pro-British political currents inside the United States.
And who should sit at that desk? My friend, I am that man.
When Bush was in the Congress, he brought in what amounts to a raving racist, really indistinguishable from a Nazi eugenics or Nazi race scientist, so-called, this man Shockley, and gave him the respectability of being able to address a group of members of the United States Congress. The argument then always being, the bad genes are multiplying too fast. Everybody knew this meant blacks. The good genes are not multiplying fast enough. This meant Anglo-Saxons and maybe other whites, if they're lucky, right?
In het zuiden van Californië, bij de stad San Diego, wordt in een ondergrondse bunker diep gekoeld op deze boerderij het zaad bewaard van 2 Nobelprijswinnaars en 3 andere donors. Miljonair Robert Graham heeft hen uitgekozen om samen met jonge intelligente vrouwen een superras te kweken. Graham, die geschrokken van de publiciteit geen interviews geeft, heeft al 10 jaar geleden een boek geschreven waarin hij een beroep doet op intelligente mensen om hun sperma af te staan en zo te zorgen voor een nieuw superras. De enige donor die er rond vooruit wil komen dat hij al 2 maal zaad heeft gegeven is de uitvinder van de transistor, Nobelprijswinnaar Dr. William Shockley.
Dr. Shockley, why did you give sperm to this exclusive bank for Nobel laureates?
Well, for a long time I've been interested not only in the human quantity problem, that is the population explosion that exists worldwide, but also in the human quality problem. In fact, what it is doing is offering more choice and more freedom.
Do you think that the white race is superior?
I would think that the black population, there is no doubt in terms of performance, intellectual performance, the black population is much lower than the white. And furthermore, as I have stressed, the highest birth rate that I found in the 1970 census applies to the lowest socioeconomic segment of the black population, rural black farmland. They average 5.4 children, enough to double their fraction of the population in one generation.
But should we compare it to breeding of racehorses and dogs?
The same laws apply.
And therefore, said Shockley, what we ought to do is use sterilization, allegedly voluntary sterilization, but everybody knows that voluntary sterilization becomes forced sterilization if that's the price of getting your welfare check or some other thing that you need to survive from the government. And therefore, Shockley said, if we can prevent the bad genes from multiplying faster, we'll keep the gene pool intact, because then the good genes will multiply more slowly. You see, if you really believe, as Bush does, that there's an Anglo-Saxon master race, and this is what Harriman believed, and this is one of the core beliefs, I would say, of Skull and Bones. If you believe that there's an Anglo-Saxon master race that ought to rule the world, the big problem you have is that there are so few Anglo-Saxons.
They see these people as a threat to their life, and they want to get rid of them. Overpopulation means getting rid of the people at the bottom of the scale, not at the top.
Opmerkelijk in dit verband was een bezoek aan Dr. Stephen Mumford, auteur van meerdere boeken over overbevolking. Boeken die de aandacht trokken van onder andere George Bush.
Early in the year, maybe February or April, I met with George Bush in his office in Houston just after he left the CIA. And I had been doing research of a similar nature there in Houston, and had written a book on overpopulation as a national security threat. I presented a 2-page synopsis of that book to George Bush in his office in Houston. Bush read the 2-page synopsis, which concluded that overpopulation is the gravest threat to U.S. security, even more serious than the nuclear threat. And at that point, George Bush said to me, I agree with everything you're saying here in this synopsis, and I can assure you that people at the CIA agree with you too.
Dat de CIA inderdaad bezig was met deze materie, blijkt uit dit rapport, waarvan tot voor kort maar 1 exemplaar bestond.
There was only 1 copy of this, and it was kept under lock and key. It's a very interesting story. The agencies involved were the National Security Council, the Central Intelligence Agency, Department of Defense, Department of State, and the Agency for International Development. Where population size is greater than available resources, or is it expanding more rapidly than the available resources? I mean, this is the one that says why it's a security threat, or how it becomes a security. Where population size is greater than available resources, or is expanding more rapidly than the available resources, there's a tendency toward internal disorders and violence, and sometimes disruptive international policies or violence. This is what happened with Iraq and Kuwait. In developing countries, the burden of population factors added to others will weaken unstable governments, often only marginally effective in good times, and open the way to extremist regimes.
Volgens Mumford is overbevolking er de oorzaak van dat jaarlijks miljoenen Mexicanen de grens met de Verenigde Staten proberen over te komen.
We share a 2,000-mile border with Mexico. When you share a 2,000-mile border with a country of 90 million people who are going to war, civil war, how many tens of millions are going to come across our border? And what is this going to do to the security of Americans? I mean, here in Chapel Hill even, I mean, we're going to feel the effect in a big way. I mean, the odds of this happening, if we just ignore the situation, the odds of it happening are nearly 100%. You know, half of Mexicans now eat 1,300 calories per day or less. That's the minimum requirement. So half of all Mexicans are malnourished. Well, things are only going to get worse. They're not going to get any better. And so what does this mean for U.S. security? Hell, it means everything.
On an August day in 1988, an historic event took place. It didn't happen on Main Street or in any American town, but in Russia, where soldiers began destroying hundreds of nuclear missiles with the understanding that we'd destroy some of our own, the first disarmament treaty of its kind. And though most Americans were unaware of the significance of the moment, or realized it was George Bush who led the way, someday their grandchildren will.
President Bush was elected, and we had hoped that he would be, would offer much more leadership in this area than President Reagan, because we knew that he had at one time strong feelings about family planning. In fact, he was one of the leaders in Congress as a congressman in this area.
So yes, you can see this racial ideas which go back to Harriman and the Nazis. You can see them being continued and perpetuated today.